The curse of consciousness, why the smartest minds suffer the most. What if I told you that being more intelligent doesn't make life easier, it makes it harder? That the more you understand, the more you suffer. That the very thing society celebrates, your brain, your insight, your ability to see deeply into the world, is actually the root of your deepest dissatisfaction. Sounds dramatic, right? But this isn't fiction. It's not a philosophical exaggeration. It's the brutal truth Arthur Schopenhauer saw so clearly that most people still run from it today. Because he realized something terrifying: the more conscious you become, the more unbearable life begins to look. And intelligence, real intelligence, isn't just about solving problems, it's about seeing the world with painful clarity. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Think about it. The average person walks through life with a kind of blissful ignorance. They get up, go to work, scroll TikTok, eat dinner, go to bed, rinse and repeat. They complain, sure, but they're comfortable. They believe in things. They have hope. They see purpose in routine. But if you're intelligent, truly intelligent, you begin to see through all of that. You start to notice the absurdity of routine, the emptiness behind most conversations, the mechanical repetition of human behavior. You begin to ask questions that break the illusion. Why am I doing this? What is all this for? Why do people chase things that never satisfy them? Why does everything good eventually fade? These aren't abstract questions, they're knives. And the sharper your mind, the deeper they cut.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
That's where Schopenhauer comes in. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He didn't try to protect us with optimism or spiritual fluff. He said outright, life is suffering, and intelligence only amplifies that truth. Because intelligence forces you to confront reality without filters. You see the lies behind social roles, the futility of ambition, the inevitability of death. You see how desire never ends, how satisfaction is temporary, how boredom creeps in even when everything seems perfect. And worst of all, you see that most people don't see it. You're surrounded by shallow happiness, artificial goals, and people who think they've made it because they bought a house, got a promotion, or posted a viral video. And you ask yourself, is this it? Is this really what we live for? And here's the paradox. Intelligence gives you the ability to solve problems, but it also reveals problems that can't be solved. You can understand the world better, but that understanding doesn't make it more livable. But in fact, it often does the opposite. You begin to feel dislocated. Not because something is wrong with you, but because something is wrong with the world, and now you can see it. You don't fit in because you're not supposed to. You're wired to detect meaninglessness where others feel meaning. You're wired to see impermanence where others see stability. And that's not a gift, it's a burden. So let me ask you this. Would you give up your intelligence if it meant you could be happy again? That's the question Schopenhauer forces us to face, one that haunts every person who's ever thought too deeply about life. The curse of consciousness, why the smartest minds suffer the most. There's a hidden curse buried inside consciousness, and Schopenhauer was one of the few philosophers who dared to unwrap it without flinching. He saw what most thinkers only whispered, that to be highly intelligent is to be highly aware, and that awareness is not just power. It's pain, deep pain. Because with every layer of reality you understand, you also inherit a new layer of burden. You become aware of suffering, not just your own, but the world's. you start to see how much of our lives are distractions from the truth. How most people don't live, they just cope. And if you're intelligent, you can't help but notice it. You wake up at 3 a.m., not because you're worried about your job, but because you're asking, what does any of this mean? And no one around you has the answer, because they're too busy avoiding the question. Schopenhauer said that the more intelligent a person is, the more they suffer, and not because they're broken, but because they're awake. Intelligence expands our sensitivity. You don't just see a sunset, you feel the fleeting nature of beauty. You don't just see a birthday party, you sense the passage of time and the approach of death. You can't enjoy things in the shallow, instinctive way others can, because your mind drills deeper, always deeper. You see the layers of contradiction, the illusions people build to protect themselves, and the fragility behind every comfort. And here's the dark twist. The more you try to explain this to others, the more alienated you become. Because people don't want to hear the truth. They want to be reassured, and if you don't give them that, they don't see you as wise, they see you as negative. So what happens? You start to isolate, not out of arrogance, but out of necessity. You pull away from shallow conversations, from surface-level friendships, from environments that reward small talk and punish depth. You become a loner not because you hate people, but because you crave honesty, and honesty is rare. Schopenhauer saw this in himself. He lived most of his life away from the spotlight, disgusted by the shallowness of society, suspicious of fame, and skeptical of intellectual trends. And he believed that the intelligent person, if they were truly honest, would almost always be alone. But because the crowd doesn't love truth, it loves comfort, and the intelligent person, almost by accident, becomes a threat to that comfort. But the suffering doesn't stop at loneliness. It gets worse. Because intelligence doesn't just separate you from others, it separates you from yourself. You begin to doubt your desires. You question your passions. You start to wonder if anything you want is actually real, or if it's just another illusion created by the will, by biology, by the machinery of survival. Schopenhauer believed that the root of all suffering is the will, the blind, endless force driving everything in nature to want, to strive, to desire. And intelligence, instead of freeing us from that will, actually makes us more aware of its tyranny. We see ourselves chasing goals that don't satisfy, desiring things that decay, clinging to hopes that collapse. And even when we get what we want, we realize the wanting was stronger than the having. This is the deepest curse of intelligence. It exposes the futility of desire. It reveals that all our striving leads to more striving. That there's no final peace, no ultimate satisfaction, just a cycle. And the more you understand this, the more unbearable it becomes to participate in it. But you still eat, sleep, date, work, but something in you has cracked. You're performing a role that no longer convinces you. You're in the play, but you've seen the script. And it's not a comedy, it's a tragedy. So let me ask you something very real. If you could take a pill that would erase your highest thoughts but bring you peace, would you take it? That's the Schopenhauer dilemma. And it's not theoretical. It's spiritual. It's the question every intelligent person eventually has to face. Is the truth worth the suffering it brings? Freedom through pessimism. How Schopenhauer transforms suffering into strength. If intelligence opens the door to suffering, how do we survive it? How do we keep from collapsing under the weight of what we know, what we see, what we feel? This is where Schopenhauer does something almost no philosopher before him dared to do. He tells us, don't run from the suffering. Understand it. Accept it. Transcend it not by escaping the world, but by seeing it clearly. This is where pessimism becomes a form of power. Because once you stop trying to force the world to be something it's not, once you stop expecting life to give you what it never promised, you become free in a way most people never experience. You no longer need illusions to cope. You no longer need hope to function. You've burned through the false comforts, and what remains is clarity. Schopenhauer called this the philosophy of resignation. But this wasn't about giving up. It was about letting go. Letting go of the idea that life is supposed to make you happy. Letting go of the belief that desire will lead to peace. Letting go of the desperate chase for meaning in external things, money, status, romance, legacy. He believed that when you stop demanding life be perfect, you begin to see it as it is. And that shift, though painful, is liberating. You don't become numb. You become still. You stop running. You start watching. And in that stillness, something unexpected happens. The pain doesn't disappear, but it becomes manageable. You start to see the beauty hidden inside the tragedy, the silence inside the scream. This is where Schopenhauer becomes not just a philosopher, but a spiritual guide. He believed that art, music, and contemplation were the bridges between suffering and serenity. Why? Why Tilma? Because they allow us to step outside of the endless or the hungry, striving force that keeps us chasing and never arriving. When you listen to a symphony, or read a poem that reflects your inner storm, or stare at a painting that captures something too profound for words you aren't wanting, your being. For a moment, the will is quiet. The chaos recedes, and you are simply alive, without needing to chase anything. That's the kind of peace Schopenhauer believed was possible, not a peace of achievement, but a peace of detachment. And here's where intelligence, once your curse, becomes your greatest gift. Because only those who see deeply can feel deeply. And only those who feel deeply can create deeply. The intelligent person suffers more, but they also perceive more. But they can transform their pain into philosophy, their loneliness into literature, their despair into depth. They can become mirrors of the human condition, reflecting the truth that others can't look at directly. That's why so many great artists, thinkers, and mystics were people who suffered. Not because suffering is romantic, but because suffering, when processed through intelligence, becomes insight, that it becomes art, it becomes wisdom, and wisdom is the only thing that makes suffering worth it. So what does this mean for you right now in your life? It means you don't have to fear your mind. You don't have to apologize for your depth, your intensity, your questions. But yes, intelligence can ruin your life if you let it isolate you, if you let it harden you, if you let it convince you that everything is meaningless. But it can also rebuild your life if you use it to rise above illusions, to see beauty in the broken, to create meaning where none is given. Schopenhauer's pessimism isn't a dead end. It's a doorway, a way out of the exhausting cycle of chasing happiness and into a quieter, deeper existence. So ask yourself, what if the goal of life isn't to be happy, but to be aware? What if the pain you feel isn't a flaw, but a form of vision? What if your intelligence isn't ruining your life but showing you what life actually is, so you can finally live it on your own terms? That's Schopenhauer's gift to us. Not comfort, not hope, but truth. And in the end, truth, however painful, is the only thing that can set us free.